In this video, we will learn how to simplify fractions by finding the greatest common factor. Let's say you're making a cake and your recipe calls for some butter. Butter comes in sticks, but the recipe might specify the butter in tablespoons. Most butter is wrapped with paper that marks off the equivalent of a tablespoon. There are usually 8 tablespoons marked off on a stick of butter. So a tablespoon is 1/8 of a stick of butter. If your recipe says you need 4 tablespoons, that's 4/8 of a stick of butter. 4 is half of 8, so it's reasonable to say that the recipe calls for half a stick of butter. We can write that as a fraction, 1/2 or 1/2. Saying 1/2 of a stick of butter is simpler and easier to understand than saying 4/8 of a stick of butter. Lots of fractions can be simplified in the same way. Here we have a stick of butter and half a stick of butter. We can slice the whole stick into 18 slices and the half stick into 9 slices, making them 18/18 and 9/18. But it's still the same amount of butter. That is pretty easy to see when we're talking about a whole something or a half of something. But what if we're dealing with a fraction that is less easy to wrap our head around? Say 7/13 or 6/24. How can we find a simpler way of expressing these fractions? Or is there even a simpler way to say these fractions? To do this, we're going to have to look at the fraction and find the greatest common factor of our fraction's top number and bottom number. Great, you say, but what the heck is a factor? That's a very important question. Factors, it turns out, are super useful in working with fractions. Let us digress for a moment and talk about factors. To start off our digression, let's look for some factors out in the wild. Here's a simple multiplication problem. 2 times 3 equals 6. In the language of math, the 6, which we might think of as the answer, is called the product. In this case, the product isn't something you buy at a store. Think of it as something more like the result of the multiplication we just did. And the 2 and the 3, those, my friend, are a couple of factors of 6. One way to think of factors is that they are the numbers that, when multiplied, give a particular product. 2 and 3 are factors of 6 because when you multiply them, you get 6. And 1 and 6, when multiplied, also gives a product of 6. So they are factors of 6 too. Any number can be its own factor if multiplied by 1. Okay. So now we know that 1, 2, 3, and 6 are factors of 6. Numbers that are bigger than 6 can't divide evenly into it. Let's look at another number, say 8. Let's go on an expedition looking for factors of 8. We'll shove our table here over to make some room and look at all the numbers between 1 and 8. We'll fire up our calculators, and if any of those numbers can divide evenly into 8 with no remainder, then we've caught ourselves a factor. So 8 is the dividend, the number being divided. The potential factors are the divisors, the numbers being divided by. The quotients, the results of the division, we'll put underneath each potential factor. And below that, we'll put the remainders. Here are our results. 1, 2, 4, and 8 have remainders of 0 and are in. The rest are out. Now we know what our factors are for 8. You can use this method for manually finding factors. And for small numbers, it can be very practical. But for larger numbers, well, I don't know about you, but I ain't got that kind of time. Calculators often have a function that will give you the factors of a number, as do most spreadsheets. Personally, I just ask Google, which can sometimes be very helpful that way. Your results may vary. So, factors, yeah. Where were we? Oh, simplifying fractions. Okay. Let's go back to our butter example. How do we get from 4/8 to 1/2 using the greatest common factor? We need to find the greatest common factor of the numbers in the numerator, the top number, and the denominator, the bottom number. In this case, that's 4 and 8. For 4, the factors are 1, 2, and 4. For 8, they are 1, 2, 4, and 8. The greatest common factor of the numerator and the denominator is 4. Now we divide the numerator and the denominator by 4. Remember, if we do the same operation to both the top and the bottom of the fraction, the amount represented by the fraction remains the same. 4 divided by 4 is 1. That's our numerator. 8 divided by 4 is 2. That's our denominator. This shows that 4/8 is the same as 1/2. So our procedure is 1. Find the largest factor of both the numerator and the denominator. 2. Divide both the numerator and the denominator by this common factor. 3. Replace the numerator and denominator with the answers you got in the fraction.